Next up, let's say cannabis is something that I was underwhelmed as the panelists come up. If you can pop a look here, up and out. I saw a business plan for somebody I really respected. It wasn't a business plan. This was 4 or 5 years ago, and I said I'm gonna give it a pass. I can't. I need a plan. I need to perform the best. And what's better is that we invest in funds. Funds up here, particularly in emerging industries like crypto, blockchain, or cannabis. So here we have fund managers. We also, by the way, a lot of this, the portfolio companies, we all need talent. The families, actually, they prefer not to have one CIO, they'd like to have a CIO council. But oftentimes, you need somebody to review. And so Jim Hawk wears 2 hats, other than 3 hats, he's moderator of the panel. But he helps us connect talent with our network, which we'll talk about at a separate point. So I'll turn it over to you, Jim. Why are we should cannabis be so compelling today, and why Chicago among other places?
Yes, well, thanks for that, Mark. So I'm going to hijack the question a little bit, and specifically with the context of cannabis as a backdrop. I'm a Chicagoan at heart. I was born and raised here. Lived here for long enough to raise some kids here, and ended up moving to Boston not too long ago. But I feel like a Chicagoan still somehow. And so Chicago is obviously a cannabis city now. And there are many interesting things about that. And we're lucky to have a pretty good and diverse panel here today to talk about that through a variety of lenses. And so I'm going to ask everybody on the panel to do a brief introduction of themselves, trying to keep it fairly concise, given our time constraints, and then I'll ask you the question. I'll start with myself. My name is Jim Hawk. I'm with Bar Capital Global, one of the 2 bar companies. We are basically engaged in the work of transformation of those companies that we believe have the potential to elevate human experience. Our focus right now, at least, is plant-based wellness, including cannabis and psychedelics, and also ag tech and real estate and places where all these things are. So with that, I'll ask Andres to introduce himself, and we'll continue down the rest of the panel, and then I'll ask the question.
I'm Andreas Feldmeyer. I'm the partner and co-founder at Chicago Atlantic. We're a credit-oriented asset manager based here in Chicago. And a couple of years ago, we started a fund that's primarily focused on cannabis space. The other areas we focus on is recurring revenue financing, real estate bridge lending, lender finance. Focus over the past years was really cannabis because as a credit investor, we like investing in industries that have secular growth trends, which is cannabis, obviously, and secondly, an industry that's very resilient in potential downturns. The underlying product demand, medical recreation side, very resilient. That's not like the industry yet.
Hello, I am Carmen Grace. Thanks for having me. Great to meet you guys. Nice to meet you in person. I'm Carmen Grace, and I am the CEO and founder of Aclara. We are a Chicago-based startup developing a cannabis insights and data platform for consumer packaged goods, healthcare, and cannabis companies. The tools that we're developing allow our clients to identify and forecast the impact of legal cannabis demand on traditional categories, the usual suspects, OTC, beverage, alcohol, healthcare, etc. We have also partnered with 2 global data companies, Nielsen and Ipsos, on our client go-to-market strategy. Now, a bit about me. I have spent my career within the consumer packaged goods space, Mars Wrigley, Conagra Foods, Campbell's Soup, always leveraging data to drive market share growth. And about 5 years ago, I began to think about cannabis in a broader way, and that led me to the launch of Aclara. Since that time, I've become an expert witness for state legislatures. I sit on Governor Pritzker's Cannabis Advisory Committee, Board of Chicago Normal, as well as speaking to a variety of audiences about the impact of legal cannabis on traditional categories and consumer demand. So it's great to be here today.
Hi, I am Barrington Rutherford. I am Senior Vice President of Real Estate and Community Integration for Cresco Labs. Cresco Labs is one of the largest multi-state cannabis companies in the United States. We currently have a footprint in 10 states, including Illinois, where we were founded and remain headquartered today. It's phenomenal to be here with you all. We certainly have focused on taking a CPG approach to the cannabis industry. We are fully vertically integrated, so we participate in every level of the value chain, but it is brands that we think are very much sort of the future of this industry and why we've taken that approach. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see everybody. My name is Maddox Swenson. I'm the general partner and founder of L2 Ventures. We're an investment firm focused on venture and growth investments in cannabis, primarily technology and software companies helping build the digital infrastructure for this industry, as well as branded consumer products. We invest in kind of Series A and beyond companies that are tackling building software solutions primarily across the supply chain. Prior to launching L2, I co-led M&A and investments at IAC, publicly traded technology company that could spawn companies including Expedia, TripAdvisor, Match Group. In that role was focused primarily on investing in markets that were in the midst of this offline to online transition, which we are seeing, per the FinTech panel earlier. Many of those trends are apparent in cannabis today. Portfolio companies include LeafLink, the largest B2B e-commerce marketplace connecting dispensaries and brands. Jane Technologies, one of the largest B2C e-commerce technology companies. Stillwater Products, company that makes precise dosing for cannabinoids. And Celebre, a company focused on biosynthesis, fancy way of creating cannabinoids via fermentation and non-traditional agricultural methods.
Awesome, thanks, Maddox. So here is the hijacked question, just slightly different than the prompt from Mark, but on the same, I think, relative page. So given the comments that everybody made, I think it's really relevant to take a pause and kind of ask where we are, related to cannabis as an industry, certainly as a frontier industry. How do you view then the U.S. cannabis industry now related to evolution and life cycle or relative stage? And what significant changes are coming that are underestimated or unexpected?
So what I've seen as a change in the past 3 years is that cannabis has proven out. There's a number of operators that are now profitable, and we know that the industry works. What is probably most unexpected for us is that at the federal level, while there can be arguments about legalization, States Act, the MORE Act, what is really surprising is that we have not seen the same thing yes. Because if you take together the Republican senators in those states that have permitted cannabis, there should be a majority of the Senate. House that has repeatedly passed the same thing again. Somehow, reasons that I cannot understand, it doesn't gain traction in the Senate. Now, I think for the industry, it would be very beneficial in terms of growing overall cost of capital. For us as a credit investor, we have our bank fund that does senior lending, has easy access to bank leverage in the background, below the returns that our investors are expecting. Cannabis loan portfolio does not take leverage on because banks can't lend in the space. And I think from an economic efficiency perspective, removing that restriction, even without legalizing cannabis at the federal level, why that is happening is really unexpected.
I think about your point around saying, can I get the fifth time to charm, right? Because I think they're learning this again today. So we can hope. When I think about where the industry is and where we are as an emerging industry, what the potential inflection points, I want to direct your attention to the slide up here. So, I mean, if you think about it, number one, $20 billion industry, over 3 dozen states with legal and retail access, and over 31% of US consumers have used a legal cannabinoid product. So you can think about 31% of US consumers have used a legal cannabinoid product. The time is now. I think when you look in, and if I direct your attention to this slide across all of the different categories of products that people are using cannabinoids for, you'll see that one of the highest is sleep aids. Anyone that's familiar with this industry understands the impact of the cannabinoids on this chronic problem. And that's essentially why CPG and healthcare are watching. So when we think about, again, the level of consumer adoption, and then if I think of the second slide. When people are using these legal cannabinoids, they stop or decrease their usage of traditional products. So think, beverage alcohol, OTC, pharmaceuticals. You'll see this study that we actually just completed with Ipsos recently. Stopped uses, prescription drugs, 26%, decreased usage, 35%. Alcohol, you can see the stats there for yourself. Over 50% are stopping or decreasing their usage of traditional categories, totaling over $600 billion in annual revenue with the expansion of legal access to cannabis at retail. And that's why we're moving to an inflection point today. I would add that I think that in addition to safe banking, I think the thing that really transforms our industry is when we understand also how to get all of the people out of jail that are currently in jail for cannabis. As you think about the panel that we are today, we're very, very blessed to be in the positions that we are to think about innovation and marketing strategy. People have been doing this for decades, but just didn't have the access to the education and the resources that we do to have this place in conversation.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the first part of the question, where are we today? I will make a favorite sort of sports analogy. I think that we are in the beginning of the second quarter. I think that we're starting to be able to see trends. I think a lot depends. As I think about the cannabis market, I think of it in terms of maturity in various states, because legalization of cannabis has been this sort of movement that has, transpired so far over the last sort of 23 years, from west to east, it seems. And so different states, different markets are more mature than others. And so I would say like the eastern half of the country, where especially the recreational market is fairly immature, we are still starting to see companies that are emerging as definite leaders in the space that can be depended upon to create sort of a baseline level of supply, even in the supply constrained market. So the opportunity for brands to matter, to come to fruition and be built out and create brand loyalty amongst consumers is very much happening in the eastern half of the country, the way it has already begun in California and Colorado and more mature markets like that. I think that the most surprising and underestimated impact that cannabis is having, or direction, I should say, that cannabis is taking, is absolutely what you mentioned, that the social impact of and the social responsibility of undoing harm that was done to communities that suffered under the drug war is very much the way that licensing in various states that are expanding today, that's how licenses are being awarded. And so it is a connection to improving communities and to, again, undoing harm that was done by criminal policies of the past that is creating this opportunity. I'm not aware of any other industry where such a straight line can be drawn between commitment to community reinvestment and top line revenue. Corporate social responsibility is not a cost center in cannabis. It is the way that licenses will be awarded and therefore the way that companies will be allowed to grow. And I think that's definitely a circumstance that's underestimated. I think that as more states are working on their regulatory packages, particularly New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, you'll see that embracing those communities and a connection to those communities will be front and center in the licensing and the licenses that they award over the next couple of years.
This is one of the most dynamic, fascinating industries when you think about all of the influence of things that are happening. You have regulation across 50 states. You have, a federal government that's really not doing very much. And so the complexity around social justice, the complexity around building out a new supply chain for an industry that literally didn't exist 5 years ago introduces enormous pain points from a multitude of perspectives, but also a ton of opportunity. As Barrington mentioned, this has been very much a states-driven movement where you have many states adopting adult use, in part because state senators are not federal senators, and the ability to drive horse trading to get cannabis legalization is a little bit easier than when your job, full-time job, depends on it. And so what we see is, I'd say I grew up playing hockey. We're probably the end of the first period, where we have a ton left to do, given it takes a lot of work to build cultivation facilities. It takes a lot of capital to build cultivation facilities. It takes a lot of capital to build the technology infrastructure to support an e-commerce business that exists in 20 different markets that all look and feel a little bit different. The interesting component of this is that it's also a very event-driven type of industry given the regulatory backdrop. The SAFE Act is one piece of legislation that could dramatically change the pace of development across different corners of the industry. So you have this interesting setup where things move very fast and then they slow down for a little bit and then they move very fast. And I think one of the things that we'll continue to see, and you see this across other, social movements, where once it hits a tipping point, you kind of turn around and all of a sudden the train is going 100 million miles per hour and you didn't even know it. So I think, we're probably going to see that in the next 3 years. At some point, the federal government will have to weigh in. But at this point, I think probably the most, one of the interesting things that I think we'll start to see in the next 3 years, I know Cresco has made substantial investments relative to the other MSOs across their technology stack. I think we're going to start to see technology and software and some of those companies supporting the industry become extremely valuable. I mean, if you look at the restaurant industry, Toast, for example, went public the other day at a $30 billion valuation. If you look at the market caps of Grubhub, Toast, DoorDash, all of these companies that are enabling the sale of food, they're getting up there to the amount of food sold through restaurants. And so I think, technology companies, particularly given the supply chain is so new, you have basically a blank canvas to build things new without a ton of legacy infrastructure that exists in other industries.
So if you build it, they will come, basically. So the other thing that I just wanted the panel to just touch on briefly is that thematically, kind of within our family of companies, we kind of believe, without a sports metaphor, that we're kind of through whatever phase one is. And rather than try to figure out exactly where we are in phase one, we like to think a little bit more about the long game. And so we believe a couple things need to happen in order for phase 2 and 3 to really come about. One of them is that we need to destigmatize cannabis in ways that we've been, I think, fairly unsuccessful in doing. That includes all the different components of the plant that are, if you've seen as many things as kind of we have been privileged to see over the last 6 months, there's an incredible amount of work being done. For example, a late series trial on a cannabis-derived compound to bring an end to the symptoms of long COVID. The list is, goes forever, right? But in terms of that, getting into that kind of world that Maddox just outlined, can you kind of talk about, what you think it will take for us to get to that destigmatization of cannabis, and then what you think the magnitude of that shift will kind of look like when we're able to kind of get there? There are other things that need to happen, obviously, like infrastructure, like federal legality, the list goes on. But, if you could just reflect a little bit on what you think that shift looks like, given those things coming into play and kind of the magnitude of it.
Well, if we look at consumer surveys, somewhere between 60 and 80% of the country support legalization of cannabis. So I think the stigma with that number going from 30 to 60% is already faded to a large extent. But you still see institutional barriers with most consumers of cannabis still having to pay cash or through some app. It doesn't convenient. And with that comes some perception of stigma. With some brokers not clearing cannabis, comes some perception of stigma, even though there's a widespread acceptance throughout. Even very conservative states permitting cannabis that is right. I think the other big trend that has started, and I think will continue next year, is that something to watch is the creation of brands. Initially, it was pretty light that product. Now brands become more and more important because operators think how to create a longer term advantage. Like what is product like alcohol wine, or a pharmaceutical medical product, or a lot of.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts with the umbrella statement about it's not really about getting high, it's about getting well. And I think when we are able to fully dimensionalize that for a number of areas of society through, number one, through the creation of brands that are more need state focused. So we'll think about sleep, we'll think about pain, anxiety, and desire for relaxation that supersedes all of those chronic symptoms. Cannabis used in that level of context and consumer demand driven by those need states. I think the second element is social consumption. So if you think about, New York, as well as we have one here in Illinois, particularly New York, City of New York and Detroit, the respective directors of nightlife within those states are also responsible for understanding how to create social consumption lounges for cannabis. And when we think about like the substitutable and complementary usage, being able to socialize with people and consume cannabis in all of its forms is also part of the path to destigmatization. So again, I think it's around the social elements. We know relaxation is very important. Cannabis is very, and we're living in a fairly stressed society. And then if we think about this from a health standpoint, to really negate like the lies that we've been told about this plant for a number of years.
I'm just echoing really. I think you're both right. I think this is I think first of all, destigmatization is happening, right? Like I think as you see, whenever there's a cannabis bill that comes up, it is generally very well accepted by voting populations. I think that when dispensaries open in communities, they are today much more welcome. When I first started at Cresco, we would see dispensaries located in industrial parks all the time. Today, our most common next door neighbor is Starbucks. And so I think that it's in process. I think that that the destigmatization is happening, but I think that it has to happen in every area of our society. So I think that, the fact that you can't use a credit card is telling. That makes a statement to consumers that this is not yet something that we are comfortable as society with. But at the same time, every state in recent memory for the last several that have, especially the last several that have like large populations that have made moves on legalization or even like substantial relaxing of their regulations are looking at consumption labs. Illinois legalized consumption labs, as did New York, and we expect that the other states will be following suit, especially those that are considering adult use. So the brands and these are all things that I think are sort of moving in that direction. The emergence of brands and creation of sort of brand loyalty, and I just think that as we see, hopefully, safe banking pass, but also other local initiatives that allow for on-site and social consumption. I think those are things that really move the needle quite a lot.
Agree with everything the panel said. I think consumer access and competition. If you look at states like California, Colorado, and Michigan, they have much more competitive markets that are much more consumer friendly. Illinois actually is probably one of the least friendly markets to consumers from the perspective of prices are very expensive, licenses are more constrained, and so consumer access is limited. The more dispensaries we have, the more nice dispensaries we have that people want to walk into and see what's available, the more normal it will become. Consumer safety, that is a huge component here, and that plays into brands. When we buy Tylenol, it's the same thing as wall Tylenol or whatnot, but it's branded and it's safe, and you can trust it. And I also think one of the component which is some regulation around marketing and what you can say to consumers and what you can describe the product does. Look at the alcohol industry and what they've marketed on. They've normalized getting wasted, for many years. And I know that, they've also done their fair share to say drink responsibly, but, raise your hand if you've woken up with a pounding headache and don't remember maybe one or two things you said the night before. I would guess at one point, everybody in this room might have raised their hands. That's become normal in some respect. I think if you look at what Carmen is building, she's looking at the why of why consumers use these products, and a lot of it is around wellness and product development. So smoking and combustible products still a big part of the market, not the healthiest part of the market. So new and evolving form factors that align with wellness-oriented lifestyle will continue to make this more of a wellness and health product than it is of what folks thought years ago when peace, love, and rock and roll was coming to the front.
Thanks for that. So, my view is, and I'm sure the panelists would probably agree that, one of the most important things we can do is actually take a step back and look at the data. Because the data really tells a different story than the stigma does. And, one of them is the perception and the other is fact. So, I think we have to continue that dialogue. So in the interest of making sure that we stay on schedule, I'm going to suggest that we continue the conversation in the breakout. But anybody that wants to discuss any of these threads a little bit further, please come to the cannabis breakout, and we'll continue talking about it.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone. We're going to switch to impact. Zach, you want to chime in?
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.